Welcome to Lawline. In honor of Law Day, we have come to Albany to visit the highest court in New York State, the Court of Appeals. Right now, I'm sitting at the bench where the 7 judges hear the attorneys pleading their clients' cases. We'll be meeting with Chief Judge Saul Wackler and the associate judges. We'll learn how the court works and discuss some of the landmark decisions. Let's go meet with the Chief Judge. Thank you, Judge Wackler, for having us here in this magnificent courtroom in the Court of Appeals.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Alan.
Judge, can you tell our audience, what is a typical day in the life of the Court of Appeals like?
Well, the judges on our court are very hard-working judges. They get here about 7 o'clock in the morning every day. We go into conference at about 10. Not about 10, exactly at 10. And we stay in conference till 12:30, have lunch, and then take the bench. We take the bench at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, except on Fridays when we take the bench at 1 in the afternoon. We get off the bench about 5:30. We all go to dinner together at 6. At about 7:30, we're back from dinner, back in our chambers, and we stay there till about 11:30 in the evening.
Now, how does a case get to the Court of Appeals?
Well, this is the court of last resort. In most cases, this is called the Supreme Court of the state. It is the Supreme Court of the state because, as I say, it is the last or the highest appellate court within the state. After this court, you can only go to the United States Supreme Court, and then not in every instance. So for most cases, this is the end of the line. A case starts in the trial court, and then you have the intermediate appellate court, which handles all the appeals from the trial court, and then on permission, certain cases are allowed to our court, usually about 300 or 400 a year.
Well, who comes here? Do you have the litigants here? Do you take testimony here?
No, only the lawyers come here. We read the briefs. We're bound by the record of the trial below, that is the trial that was conducted in the trial court, the evidence and so forth. We don't find facts here. We just apply the law, so that we take the record as it's presented to us from the trial court, and the attorneys, one representing the appellant, that is the side which lost in the court below, seeking to overturn what was done below, and the respondent, which is the winner in the court below, seeking to sustain the victory. And the two of them argue the case. The case is argued before the 7 judges of this court, and then the 7 judges parcel out the cases. Each one reports on a separate case in conference, and then ultimately we vote on it. If 4 judges vote a particular way, either to affirm the court below or to reverse the court below, that becomes the decision of this court.
Now, I was watching yesterday in the courtroom that all the judges were asking questions. Is each judge assigned a particular case?
Yes, each judge is assigned a case, but only after the oral argument, so that when the cases are being argued, no judge knows what case he or she will draw. When all the arguments are concluded, we retire to the robing room and we take a card. Each card has the case name on it, and we pass the cards out, and then we draw the cards in order of seniority. And that's the first time we know what case it is that we will be responsible for.
When you say responsible for, you mean writing the decision?
Well, it all depends. We're responsible for reporting that case during the conference. It's almost like show and tell. We take that case and we say, we believe this should be affirmed. We explain our reasons for it, and then we go around in the order of seniority. We go around the table, and we see how many judges agree with the position advanced or how many disagree. If 3 other judges agree with you, then you have the court. Then you have a majority of the court, and you write the opinion. If another judge disagrees with you and 3 judges agree, 3 or more agree with that judge, then that judge will write the opinion and you'll write the dissent, or else you might join in the opinion. It's a dynamic.
What happens if you have 4 judges on one side, 3 on the other? One judge wants to convince one of the judges in the majority.
Oh, yes, you try to convince all the time, right up until the moment that case is handed down as a written opinion. You try to persuade one side or the other to join the majority. You want to change the result, and that's where you have the constant give and take and debate and almost adversarial system within the court itself. It's a very healthy process.
Now, there are 7 judges. If one judge was to be sick or for whatever reason excuse him or herself from a case, then you have 6. Do you ever have ties?
Oh, yes, we've had that before, and we'd have 3-3, and if there is absolutely no way of breaking the deadlock, no one judge will side with one side or the other, so you have a 3-3 stalemate. We vouch in another judge. We usually take a judge from the appellate division, bring that judge in, and then schedule the case for re-argument. The case is then argued all over again, and a panel of 7 then re-decides that case.
The typical case, how many times is it conferenced?
The typical case is conferenced perhaps twice after the argument, and then when the writing comes down, the writing might be on the table 3 or 4 different conferences where various aspects are in the collegial process worked on, so that ultimately the writing will represent the consensus of those who have joined in the writing.
Now, which cases get to be heard at the Court of Appeals level?
Well, in the criminal side, the criminal cases, any one judge in our court or a judge in the appellate division can grant leave to that appellant to come to our court. Either the defendant on one side or the prosecutor on the other side, depending who wins below. In the civil side, on the civil cases, that is the non-criminal cases, it takes 2 judges on our court after reading a report on a motion for leave to appeal. It takes 2 judges on our court to grant leave, or 2 judges in the appellate division to grant leave.
Your court, how do you categorize it? As liberal, conservative?
It can't, it defies that kind of categorization, Alan, because each case is taken as a separate case. The law is applied. Commentators have been trying for some time to determine whether we are a liberal court or a conservative court. We were marked recently as a pragmatic court, a court which does not fall into any one category, but which really decides the cases appropriately and properly based on the precedents.
How does one become a judge of the Court of Appeals?
I was a trial judge, and then I ran for the Court of Appeals. All the other judges on the court were appointed, but then I was elected, and then the Constitution was changed, and we became an appointed court. So all of them were appointed by Governor Cuomo. That was their entry onto the court. My entry on the court was the election process. It was a statewide election, and I became chief judge by virtue of appointment by Judge Cuomo. So every one of our judges right now sits under appointment by Governor Cuomo.
Can Governor Cuomo appoint anyone he wants to the court?
No. What they do is, when the term is up, and our term is for 14 years, the Judicial Nominating Commission submits names. Many people apply. They go through a screening process, and on the merit screening process, certain names are submitted to the governor, between 3 and 7 names, and the governor must select one person from that list.
Well, if the governor doesn't like those names on the list, what can he do?
He has nothing to, he can't do anything. He has to appoint from that list. That way, it prevents the governor from just randomly selecting anyone whom he might please. He's restricted to a group, and we know that that group is found to be highly qualified by a nonpartisan screening panel, which interviews and very carefully selects.
And a sitting judge of the Court of Appeals, if his term is up after 14 years, does he have to go through this committee as well?
Yes, he does. Or she does. Yes. The name is resubmitted and the process is repeated. I might say that, and I know this is somewhat self-serving, that Governor Cuomo has done an excellent job, both in putting the first woman to ever serve on our court, that's Judge Kaye, and the first black judge to ever serve for a full term on our court, that's Judge Alexander. He has been completely nonpartisan in the selection process. Coincidentally, 3 members of our court are enrolled Republicans, 3 enrolled Democrats, and 1 registered in neither party. And there's a geographical balance. We have upstaters and we have downstaters, and I think really excellent jurists.
Now, I know you hold 2 positions. One is Chief Judge of the State of New York, and the other is Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals.
Yes.
What are your roles in these 2 positions?
Well, as Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, I preside over this court. I'm the judge who was assigned the task of leading the conference. I have no more votes than any other judge on the court. I'm also responsible for this building. Statutorily, and this is an anachronism really, the statute says that the Chief Judge of the state or the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals shall be in charge of the Court of Appeals Hall. So this is my home.
And you've graciously invited us into your home.
That's correct.
Now, I noticed the chairs that we're sitting on. Can you describe them to us?
Well, these are the Ram's Head chairs. These are extremely precious and valuable, priceless, literally priceless. And we're not, we don't have them all over the court room, but we have several of them, and they're studied by people who know fine woodwork. They come from all over the country to look at the Court of Appeals Ram's Head chairs. As you will note in this courtroom, we have probably some of the most magnificent woodwork that you'll see anywhere in the country, or in the world for that matter. Each of the panels, for example, around the frames of the associate judges, which are the smaller pictures on the bottom row. The former chief judges are portrayed. Their portraits are on the top row, the larger portraits, and the associate judges, the former associate judges, are the smaller portraits. But each frame around each associate judge is individually hand-carved, and no two have the same design, similar to the panels on the bench. Each one individually done, each one unique.
Now, I saw on the bench, does each judge have their particular chair that they sit in?
Oh, yes, and it's all in order of seniority. We do everything by seniority in the Court of Appeals. That's been the tradition for 200 years. We walk out in order of seniority. We walk back into the robing room in order of seniority. The robing room has, in order of seniority, each locker where our robes are stored. We sit around the conference table in order of seniority, and on the bench. The chief judge traditionally sits in the center chair. And then on the chief judge's right is the senior associate judge, Judge Simons. On the left is the next associate in order of seniority, Judge Kay. And then it goes back and forth, rotating from one side to the other, down to the junior judge, Judge Bellicosa.
Now, Judge, before the interview, I snuck behind the bench and I saw some spittoons there.
Oh, yes. And those are the brass spittoons which have been there again for 200 years. They're not used today. At least I don't think so. But those are the same brass spittoons on rubber mats.
But somehow I pictured if one of the judges didn't like an argument, he would turn to his spittoon from time to time. And
that's right, and probably if he hit on target, you were in better shape than if he missed.
I'm going to ask you about the clock right after this break. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us. Judge Wackler, right before the break, I asked you to tell us about the clock.
Well, that clock is one of the masterpieces of wood carving. When I first came on the court, the clock was on loan to a museum out in New Mexico, and it had been traveling all over the country on exhibit in various places. And one of the first things I did when I became chief judge was to say that clock is to remain here and never to leave these premises. If anyone wants to see it, they can come here to see it.
And what other things about the particular courtroom?
Well, let me just take you on a verbal tour, if I might, Alan.
Please.
When you walk into the courthouse, you come into the beautiful rotunda, where you'll see columns of granite that were cut in Sing Sing prison by prisoners over 100 years ago. And then it was taken up the Hudson River by barge, and then up State Street by ox cart, and placed in this building. This was the old State House originally. And then the courtroom, which was over in the old Capitol, was taken over and put in the State House. This fireplace, for example, that's behind us, and all this woodwork was all taken piece by piece from the old Capitol and placed in this courthouse. When you first come in the courtroom, you'll see a statue and the only statue in the courtroom, of Robert Livingston, who was the first law chancellor of the state of New York. Robert Livingston wrote the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson. And while he was working on it, his former classmate and graduate and former law partner, John Jay, summoned him back to New York to help him work on the New York State Constitution. They were 29 years old at the time. And he came back from Philadelphia and started working with John Jay, whose portrait hangs above where I sit on the bench. And these two young men, joined by Gouverneur Morris, who was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention from Philadelphia, but at that time was a New Yorker, these three young men started working on the New York State Constitution. And they were chased by the British from New York City to White Plains, ultimately to Kingston, New York, where the Constitution was finished. And this is 10 years before the federal Constitution. You see, if we had gained our independence, which we ultimately did, each state had to have some governing body. And the Constitution was finally finished in Kingston. The people in Kingston are very proud that this was the first seat of the state government. The only reason it was because White Plains and New York City had been captured by the British. And then Kingston was burned down, and they ultimately went to Poughkeepsie to ratify the United States Constitution. But after the state was formed, Robert Livingston became the first Lord Chancellor. He was the one who swore in George Washington as the first President of the United States. And in his right hand, when you look at the statue, you'll see a roll of parchment. That's the Louisiana Purchase, which he negotiated on behalf of the United States. And John Jay, of course, was the first Chief Justice of the state of New York, and 10 years later became the first Chief Justice of the United States. And so you see we've had a rich history. By the way, Robert Livingston was from Claremont, New York, and took the first trip on the steamboat up the Hudson River, which was called the Claremont, named after his hometown. It took him 29 hours to come from New York City to Albany by steamboat.
Sometimes in heavy traffic it could take almost as long.
That's right. As you look around the portraits, you'll see distinguished jurists who have graced the bench of this court. One, you'll see Cardozo, Benjamin Cardozo, who was considered one of the patron saints of the Court of Appeals. Served as an associate judge on this court, then as chief judge for some 8 years, and then went on to Washington to become a member of the United States Supreme Court. In his portrait, you'll see he's standing behind a desk. That desk is now in the chambers which I occupy, because I occupy the chief judge's chambers. And of course, it's a great honor. I remember when I was sworn in as chief judge, and I went in and I saw my desk and I said, just think of it, that will be my desk, the desk used by Benjamin Cardozo. And someone said, yes, but remember, in 50 years from today, it will still be Benjamin Cardozo's desk. And that's a reminder, of course, not only of our mortality, but of course of the greatness of that man. So we are surrounded by history in this chamber, and there's not a member on this court who doesn't have a sense of that history every time we take the bench.
Well, it's a magnificent room. What about the other rooms of the court building?
Well, of course, each judge has his or her chambers in this courthouse. Each chamber is beautifully furnished, some in the original furniture, as is mine, which has been here for dozens, if not hundreds of years. And it's a very unique building. It's a gem. When they first built the mall over here, across the street in Albany, they wanted to build a Court of Appeals hall in the mall, in the governmental complex. And our predecessors said, no, absolutely not. We are a separate branch of government. We want a separate courthouse, and we want to retain this gem of a building, which we have done.
When I walked in, I saw the ceiling of the rotunda. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, that is the signs of the zodiac. We were teased about that because it's on a field of blue with stars, and you know the original Star Chamber got its name because there was a canopy of stars on that. So that's why they imposed the zodiac signs, so no one would call this a Star Chamber, which of course was an example of medieval injustice. But the three columns on each floor are in the traditional Greek style, Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian. So each one is unique. These columns, which I say were carved by the prisoners in Sing Sing.
Judge Saul-Walker, thank you very much for inviting us up here to Albany and to be in your home.
It's my great pleasure and privilege to have you here.
We'll be right back after this short break. You're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Stay with us. The 6 associate judges of the Court of Appeals were all appointed by Governor Cuomo. Yet they do not fall into any one category. They belong to 3 political parties: Democratic, Republican, and Independent. They're not considered liberal or conservative, but have aptly been described as pragmatic, cordial, and intelligent. One of the things that really impressed me is the mutual respect the judges have for one another.
it's a very close bonding relationship that you have with the other judges. It's someone has described it as like being married. You work together and live together, and you argue about common problems that implicate your views and beliefs very deeply. And as might be expected, it sometimes produces satisfaction of achieving something together, sometimes produces the antagonism of disagreeing with someone who can't see the worth of your views. But it's a very rewarding, enjoyable experience.
The feeling that we have for each other, the closeness we have for each other, is very important to the work that we do here. You know, the 2 weeks we spend here 10 times a year are really, we're in a little enclave ourselves, very much together, very much involved in the work of the court. And I guess for that period you could think of it as a family, a very odd kind of family, don't you think?
The fun is the interrelationship with my colleagues, interrelationship with my clerks and with the law clerks of the other judges. There's a collegiality and a congeniality to the court which does make it very pleasant, a lot of fun. You're together trying to do a good job, but you're enjoying each other. You're enjoying trying to arrive at intelligent, wise, good decisions in a collective process.
What's it like being a judge on the state's highest court?
It's like having a good time under very difficult circumstances. The job is challenging, intellectually stimulating, rewarding, and very, very, very demanding in terms of your time, the exercise of your intellect, the arriving at a certainty that that which you are deciding is a correct decision that conforms to the jurisprudence of the state on a stare decisis basis, deals adequately with the issues before you, and advances the common law in the particular area of concern.
It's a great experience if you're a lawyer, you know. You're here and you're making the laws really for the state under our common law process. So it's really an adventure every day, every case you have, you know. We are a cert court, which means we only bring up cases which we believe are of statewide importance.
What is it like to try to convince a fellow judge to your point of view?
You argue very vigorously all the time, and I've learned so much. You asked about the changes over time in my years here. I have learned a great deal about the meaning of collegiality, which is, it's a very fine art. I have read a lot about collegiality. I've never seen it well defined. It knows when to stand very firm as a matter of principle and when to stand less firm. We have to live from one case to the next, from one day to the next. It's not a battle to the death on every case.
We're supposed to be a reasoning, rational body, and the intelligence of your views, the soundness of your views is supposed to persuade other people that there is some flaw in theirs. I wouldn't guarantee that sometimes we don't resort to a little loud voices, but we try not to. We try to keep it on an intellectual level.
From time to time, the differences are not only marked, but they're argued strongly on each side. Once in a while, a voice is raised, but it's never personal. And sometimes the arguments get heated, but never is there any animosity which lingers, because you're differing over a question of law or perhaps a question of policy.
I recently read an article that the New York State Court of Appeals has been setting the trend for the state courts throughout the country. How do you feel about that?
I feel wonderful about it because that's in the tradition of the great Cardozo bench, this is, and of the premier common law court, which is a reputation that it has enjoyed not only with Cardozo but with Fuld and Breitel, and that is an important role that New York plays. with the other jurisdictions. I get to see it with respect to my American Bar Association section on legal education accreditation business, because I'm in contact with judges and legal educators throughout the country. So they're confirming and ratifying that to me, not because I read it in a newspaper, that that's so. They look to the beacon light in the development of the law to the New York Court of Appeals. That produces a lot of pride, not just because you happen to be a member of that bench, but for New York, for the reputation of this court.
I hope it does, and I think we're proud of that. It is probably one of the leading courts in the nation. We've always had a good court, and I think we do set a trend. I think other courts look to us for what we're doing.
Judge Alexander, what is it like being appointed the first black on the New York Court of Appeals?
In terms of my approach to my work, I suppose I do bring to this my whole background, as any person would. To the extent that my presence serves as a symbol to the black community at large and to the majority community, to tend to dispel in that area some of the myths that blacks, by virtue of their race, black competence or whatnot, then my presence here belies that myth.
We have a lot of attorneys in our audience. What's your advice to them if they come before the Court of Appeals?
It may sound like the old professor in me and be very prosaic, but the two things that they have to do is be extraordinarily well prepared in knowing their record and in knowing the authorities that they have cited to the court. And the second thing is they've got to try out their case with their colleagues and peers before they come before what's called a hot bench and subject themselves alone at that lectern to the 7 machine gun firing questions of our court.
I'd like to give special thanks to the Chief Judge and the Associate Judges of the Court of Appeals for graciously giving of their time and taking us into their courtroom. And as always, this is Alan Schnorman, and I'd like to thank you for watching Lawline.